The latest symbol in the American culture wars is a can of beans. In case you missed the political scuffle, last week, Robert Unanue, the CEO of Goya Foods, the largest Hispanic-owned company in the US, stood next to the president in the Rose Garden and declared his support. The response was swift and severe, a massive outcry that took social media by storm, with clips of Hispanic celebrities flushing Goya beans down their toilets, tweets of tutorials for how to hand-soak beans, and calls to boycott Robert Unanue and Goya Foods for what he had said. No question of why he was there or what those words meant to him. A similarly swift response then came from the right, a boycott, no pause, no question of why so many were so hurt. Boycott or boycott, one thing was clear. Goya had just taken center stage in what has become the template for how we in America engage with each other today, through what is colloquially called cancel culture. The phrase itself, cancel culture, is its own political flashpoint, often attributed only to liberals on the left. But the truth is that both on the left and on the right, we in America today are quick to cancel those with whom we disagree. Even more so now that many of us are living most of our social interactions online. How many of you have seen something like this appear on your Facebook feed at some point? If you think this is okay, then unfriend me immediately. We have nothing to speak about. The this can be anywhere on the political map, from racism to abortion to support for Israel to disagreement about it. The common thread, though, is that if you support someone or something that is seen as unacceptable by the broader group, you're canceled. We like to think of this as unique to our time, but as New York Times columnist Ross Douthat points out, all cultures cancel. Reputational cancellation hung over the heads of Edith Wharton's heroines. Professional cancellation shadowed 20th century figures like Lenny Bruce. Indeed, even as far back as Talmudic times, we Jews have our own version of cancel culture. It fell hardest on a young scholar who couldn't wrap his head around God in a world of injustice and didn't refrain from saying so. His name was Elisha ben Abuya. According to stories about him, even as a young student, Elisha couldn't resist secular scholarship, music, and culture of the world around him. He used to keep forbidden books tucked away in his clothes and could be often heard humming a Greek tune. But he dutifully learned, and he taught, and he became an esteemed rabbinic leader. Until one day, when he witnessed the death of a child in the process of fulfilling a mitzvah, and it broke his faith. He never returned, even going so far, according to one account in the Jerusalem Talmud, of dropping by houses of study to convince the young men there not to waste their time on Torah, but pursue careers in the trades instead. For his apostasy, Elisha ben Abuya earned the name Acher, other, and became the ancient poster child of cancel culture. You might say, from the very notion of Acher, other, that Judaism stands firmly on the side of the correctness of cancel culture. But there is a coda to Elisha ben Abuya's story, and the Talmud makes sure to tell it. Elisha had a student, Rabbi Meir, who didn't cancel Elisha. Instead, Meir went out of his way to keep seeking Elisha out as a teacher, to keep learning from him until his dying day. When asked why Rabbi Meir would do such a thing within the context of his own community that clearly found this to be a problem, the rabbinic voice famously says, Meir ate the date and threw away the pit. In other words, he saw an opportunity to learn something, and he would seek that out wherever he could find it. By remaining in conversation with the acher, with the other, Rabbi Meir chose to do something tremendously hard, something that he learned not from cancel culture, but from an alternative ethos that has also emerged from our tradition, Chavruta culture. In Chavruta culture, a pair of students are encouraged to disagree in order to mine for the truth. In Chavruta culture, you stay in conversation, you keep pushing, keep probing, keep trying to convince the other person who feels very differently from you of the merit of your perspective, and you keep listening. Indeed, Chavruta culture is best exemplified by the word used to describe a study partner. The word is bar plugta, a sparring partner or an adversarial colleague, reflecting the truth that there is always something that we can learn or some way we can grow when we remain in conversations with those with whom we most vehemently disagree. Cancel culture is seductive in its clarity and the satisfaction it brings of feeling morally in the right. And that is exactly why it should give us pause. Today, we said Birkat HaChodesh for the upcoming month of Av, the most famous day, the most famous moment of mourning is what we will do together on Tisha B'Av as we gather virtually to mourn the fall of the ancient temple. Our rabbis could have made the observance of Tisha B'Av about an evil empire that wantonly destroyed that which was most sacred to our people in an eternal battle. But they didn't do that. Instead, they focused on sinat chinam, which is defined not only as baseless hatred, but as the inability to speak to one another. They tell a story about a party invitation gone astray, delivered inadvertently to the wrong guy. You see, the host meant to invite his friend Kamsa, but his enemy, Bar Kamsa, showed up instead. Rather than allow this enemy to enter, the host refused to speak to him and publicly canceled him, which led Bar Kamsa to go off to the emperor and plant the seeds of ultimate destruction. In other words, on Tisha B'Av, our rabbis chose to assert that the collapse of society is directly linked to that moment when we stop being able to engage with those with whom we disagree. And just to make sure that we don't miss that point, they report in the name of Bar Kamsa that the biggest sin of the entire ordeal was that of the rabbis, of those who saw and sat there and were satisfied with Bar Kamsa being canceled. What happens when we cancel people or ideas? We think of it as a mic drop, a win. But more often, not only do things not get better, they can get worse. The people who cancel stop listening. The canceled often entrench. Hatred builds. destruction follows. That is the Tisha B'Av path. But there's also Rabbi Meir's path, the harder path, the more troubling path, the more demanding path. Also, the more generative path. And it's a path that we need so desperately right now. Last week was a big week for hatred. Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson kicked it off with a vile anti-Semitic screed. Many rightly condemned him immediately and vowed to shut him down. Patriots wide receiver Julian Edelman made a different play. I know he said some ugly things, Edelman said about Jackson, but I do see an opportunity to have a conversation. It's really hard to see the challenges a community can face when you're not a part of it. What we need to do is we need to listen. We need to learn. We need to act. We need to have uncomfortable conversations if we're going to have real change. So, to that end, he said, Deshaun, let's do a deal. How about we go to DC? I take you to the Holocaust Museum, and then you take me to the Museum of African American History and Culture, and afterwards, we'll grab some burgers and have those uncomfortable conversations. Deshaun Jackson agreed. Although the museums are not yet open to visitors due to the pandemic, so the burgers will have to wait, their conversation has already begun. Cancel culture or chevruta culture, it's our choice. Shabbat shalom.